I have here for you yet another embarrassing Lauren Boebert moment. And don't worry, it's not in relation to the Beetlejuice debacle. That's the past. This is something new. She introduced, and let me get the specifics on this correct, an amendment to the 2024 Agriculture and FDA spending bill that would have would reduce the salary of the Deputy Undersecretary of the Food and Nutrition Service of the Department of Agriculture, Stacey Dean, to $1 per year. That would be her salary, as a way to send a message to Stacey Dean that she is doing too many things outside of her authority in enhancing SNAP benefits, food stamps, the horror. Now, I had to explain that to you up front because Lauren Boebert's not going to be able to, because she couldn't even find the description of her own amendment on the floor once she gets called on. She knew she was going to be called on and recognized to speak, and a debacle ensues. So here's the beginning where you can't tell that anything's wrong, and then you'll see it all fall apart.
Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment,
Tell us, Laura.
it decreases the salary of the Deputy Undersecretary of the Food and Nutrition Services. And Madam Chair, I would like to reserve for the time being.
Okay, so maybe she's unprepared. She says, I'll reserve my time. Someone else can speak. Come back to me, and I'll explain the amendment that I'm introducing. I'm the one introducing this, and I seem to be clueless. And here is where it picks up, where it goes back to her.
With that, I urge the defeat of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado.
And quickly, while we're watching this podcast, listeners, any of the silence, you can just imagine she's standing on the House floor at a podium, clicking on her phone, trying to find what she's looking for, but she can't find it. And also just know, as you watch this, we're not just, haha, she was unprepared. That's part of it. But then we'll get to the more important ramifications of her ideology that is being highlighted here.
Madam Chair, one moment. My apologies. I do not have amendment number 77 in front of me. But Madam Chair, I do urge adoption of Amendment 77 to be considered to decrease the salary of the Deputy Secretary. The Deputy Secretary. I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields.
So then once again, she asks to move on, and she's urging the adoption of an amendment that she's introducing, but hasn't explained why it should be adopted. I'm introducing this amendment. Go to somebody else. Okay, now it's back to me. I'm not exactly sure, because I can't remember where I put my notes on this, where the amendment is, but I definitely think we should adopt this amendment. Now, everyone occasionally makes mistakes and comes to a meeting unprepared. Maybe not when you're on the floor of the House of Representatives, but we get it. What's bothersome is what she's trying to do. Again, reducing the salary of the, what does she call it? Deputy Secretary, or the Deputy Undersecretary of the Food and Nutrition Service of the Department of Agriculture, Stacey Dean, to $1. $1. As a way to send a message. And I was trying to, because she wasn't giving us much there, decipher exactly what the reasoning was here, what message is being sent. And so I saw once it went away from her, one of her fellow Republicans who is also in support of this explained it a little further. Here's this.
Recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, look, the Thrifty Food Plan, this is the political appointee who decided that the SNAP benefits weren't high enough, that they devised a new food plan that was used as a vehicle to just increase the SNAP benefits. The bottom line is we're spending over $100 billion a year. We have a $2 trillion deficit. We should reevaluate that increase in the Thrifty Food Plan that has resulted in a double-digit increase in SNAP benefits. And what this amendment does, it sends a clear signal to the administration that this probably wasn't a well-thought-out idea.
So I guess what's being communicated is SNAP was restructured and Stacey Dean was responsible for changes that were made that expanded access and benefits when it comes to food stamps. So people were getting too much food too easily. And that's the concern of these Republicans. Okay. They're, to play devil's advocate or to most fairly steelman them, I guess, their argument would be the way that this has been expanded is not fiscally responsible. And there are all these people who are going to get things that they don't actually need. They're not actually low income enough or whatever. And we saw that same argument from Kevin McCarthy with work requirements being enhanced and increased during the debt ceiling debate. And you have to zoom out. I want to talk about a lot here. Please stick around. This is important stuff because it's kind of more broad ideological thinking in these battles that shows up here and in a lot of other situations. Zooming out, it is the Republican Party who just data-wise has a worse record in modern American history on the debt and the deficit. So that nonsense, we're the fiscally responsible, completely not accurate. Plus, we would be in a way better situation fiscally, deficit-wise, if they would stop making these humongous tax cuts for those who are disproportionately at the top of our economic ladder. We don't need to be cutting the taxes of these gargantuous corporations and wealthy individuals as the top priority constantly, as Trump had his one big accomplishment being. And why even focus on cost savings over here when it comes to programs that benefit people who absolutely need it, when first we could just put the taxes where they should be on those who have plenty of money? But no, it's let's punish Stacey Dean because we think she gave too many people free food and that's unacceptable. When in the grand scheme of things, that amount of money you're going to save with whatever you're doing here is nothing compared to the massive amount of tax dollars we don't get anymore because of the Trump tax cuts that, again, disproportionately benefit those at the top of the economic ladder, not to mention previous Republican tax cuts and just the general trickle-down economics thinking that's poisoned our political conversations. And so that is just up front, separate from then diving into the ideology about programs like this. And what their conversation about SNAP is always motivated by is what I said, which is we're so terrified that some people who are well off are going to, because of it being too broad and too easy to access, are going to accidentally get benefits that they don't actually need. And my question would be, even though, of course, there's tweaks you can make to programs at different times based on different needs and all of that, why is that such a horrifying prospect? And that's the priority. That's why you're now going to punish Stacey Dean and try to decrease her salary. Again, when there's all these other ways you clearly don't care about fiscal responsibility. Because if you think about the way we manage these systems, you have a couple options. One is you create a system that covers everyone who needs it. But inevitably, just the size, scope, and management of these systems, inevitably some people will get benefits accidentally who maybe don't need it, they're well off, and they just kind of worked through a loophole. And is it sort of aggravating thinking about someone who's plenty well off, working through a loophole, getting a benefit they don't need? Sure. But that is such a small statistic. Whereas at least you've covered everyone who needs it. We're talking about basic needs like food. Or you can create a system that doesn't cover anyone or that no one can accidentally get access to who doesn't need it. But you then end up cutting off a lot of people who absolutely do need it. Even you would admit that, but accidentally because you're so aggressively trying to prevent the small number of people who abuse the system, you're actually hurting so many people who need it and need to use the system. We talked about studies when discussing the debate over the debt ceiling when it came to Kevin McCarthy and Biden. He really wanted to add work requirements. And we looked at this analysis that showed these added work requirements and all these different means testing aren't that effective at actually doing what they're supposed to do. They're not that effective at actually, in the case of work requirements, having people get back to work who should and are able to. But it's really effective at kicking off people who are qualified, but just don't end up getting access because of all the different added layers you've created. You've created all these hoops for people to jump through. And it's just the case that with these bureaucratic systems, a lot of people end up, now there's all this extra paperwork and these different things they have to prove that they're qualified, and they miss out. or they're not exactly sure where am I supposed to send this extra form that's been added to make sure that I'm not someone who makes above this amount and I don't have this amount of accumulated wealth based on the wealth of my parents. And people end up missing out. And so typically, and I love this, Democrats fall on the side of, let's just go ahead and set that bar higher maybe so that everyone gets covered who needs it. And maybe that ends up grabbing a few people who don't necessarily need it. But let's lean on the side of convenience for these programs, ease of availability and access, and not obsess over the tiny examples you could find of someone who really didn't need it or is abusing the system, even though, of course, in principle, you don't want that. But just the reality of the system sometimes makes that inevitable. Because if you create a perfect system, which is what they pretend like they could do, no, every single person is going to get SNAP who needs it, but we're going to make sure that no one who doesn't gets it. The only way you could create that system in reality is to have this gargantuous bureaucracy that is so expensive, you're wasting way more money than is possibly being wasted on the people who accidentally get caught in who aren't actually needing the benefits. Does that make sense? And so I do think just feeling comfortable saying, listen, okay, you could find some example of a loophole being used.
Back.
Whoops. And I get that that can be aggravating, but no, I'm not willing to risk all these increases to requirements and to checks and to paperwork and means testing that we know based on the stats on this end up kicking off a lot of people for all of these reasons we've gone through in the past who need it. And we all admit they need these benefits, but they don't get them. And that increases, in the case of SNAP, food insecurity, already way too high in the wealthiest planet on the earth. And you look at the equations they're doing, and they're concerned with the little tiny amount they could save over here, but not the big bubba amount they could. That was such a weird way to explain that. I'm being serious and then got out of it for a second. That they could save over here with just more reasonable taxation of those who absolutely can afford it. And when I say reasonable, if you're someone who's wealthy, this lib wants to take my money, most likely, you're not a multi-billionaire. And just remember, while you're paying hopefully your lawful amount and you're paying lots, there are the top richest billionaires out there who pay a single effective tax, an effective tax rate, getting everything backwards, an effective tax rate in the single digits. Richest people on the planet, single digit effective tax rate. That's what I was trying to say the first time. That's ridiculous. Why can't we do something about that? Or separate from even people who lawfully get out of paying taxes in a lot of ways because they can afford this massive apparatus of individuals to help them with that. A lot of people are wealthy and avoiding taxes, and Dark Brandon is actually doing something about that in the increased funding to the IRS, specifically to make the consumer experience better and to go after those who are wealthy, who make above $400,000 per year, and who are avoiding their taxes, their lawful tax. So if you're paying your lawful taxes, then you should be annoyed at all those people who are wealthy who aren't. And that's who Biden's going after first and foremost. Then those who are wealthy who are just getting out in lawful ways, changing taxes from there. And then we should all be able to agree on that. So there it is. Lauren Boebert getting very confused and us getting less confused about the importance of these conversations. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show and get a bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. And there's a link in the description.